In this video, I'm going to tell the creepy story of the lake house, how 3 friends went there, but got into the wrong house, and some pretty creepy things happened to them. Watch the end to see how it ends, and here we go. When I think back on this weekend, I try to remember everything we could have done to prevent what happened. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it really started 5 years ago. Are we there yet? My sister whined from the back seat for the 4th time in an hour. I felt my eye twitch as I let out an exasperated sigh, and my best friend giggled from the passenger seat. Actually, Tara, I started to reply, but was interrupted by her excited exclamation that we were pulling right up to the house we were staying at for the weekend. It was summer, the middle of July, and I could feel the stings already forming on my skin as I pulled the car to a stop. This weekend was meant for me and my best friend Kelsey to take a break from our stressful college classes, but my mom had other plans. "You'll have to take your sister with you. She needs fresh air," was the last thing my mom said before I picked up the keys to the lake house. My 17-year-old sister was already packing, and I realized I had no choice. 8 hours on the road, and here we were, at the old family lake house in Virginia, where I was finally allowed to go without my parents. Slipping out of the car, I headed to the trunk for my bags. Kelsey, my best friend, followed me, and Tara sprinted toward the house. Some called her eccentric, others called her weird, but regardless, she was still my sister, the one I loved despite her quirks. It was her first time at our lake house, and I could barely remember the last time I'd been there myself. I closed the trunk door, looking up at the looming house. The sun already passed halfway through the day. Some of the shutters had been torn away from the windows, and vines had begun to overgrow on both the left and right sides, making the structure seem even smaller than it was. When was the last time anyone was here? I thought to myself. I shook my head, ignoring that small feeling of dread brewing in the back of my mind. Mom didn't have a spare set of keys, but she said they should be under the flower pot by the door. I staggered up the porch steps, carrying my and Tara's bags, with Kelsey trailing behind me. I looked around the porch, feeling the wood creak under my weight as I stood in front of the door, which held by an inch. The flower pot was nowhere to be seen. But why? I went to check my phone, but Tara beat me to it. "Mallory, I don't have a signal. How can I play my games?" she complained, shoving her phone in my face. She was right. There was no signal. My mom had warned me that the connection would be choppy at best, but Tara's phone had a big X in the upper right corner saying no signal. Well, there goes my plans to call my mom for spare keys. Maybe the front door would just be unlocked? As if reading my mind, Kelsey handed me her bag and opened the door with a creak. She jerked the knob, then pushed on it, and then the door squealed open. "Well, that's it," announced Kelsey, looking back at me with a twinkle in her eye. She was always the positive one in our duo. No matter what happened during the day, she always found the positives in it. Tara and I exchanged glances, and she squeezed in behind Kelsey. I followed her, remembering to close the door completely and lock it behind us. Turning around, I looked around at our surroundings for the next 2 days. We were standing in the living room, which I assumed was a large couch against the wall. There was a TV stand, but the TV itself seemed to be missing. I knew that some of my uncles came here in the summer to hunt and fish, but it was still hard to determine when someone had last been here. The living room then transitioned into the kitchen on the left and the hallway on the right, which then branched off into 2 medium-sized bedrooms. Kelsey and I slept in one, and Tara slept in the other. I was shivering, wishing I'd worn a sweatshirt before we'd entered the house. Even with the windows closed, there was a chilly draft in the 1-story house. Tara had already taken one of the bedrooms when I heard her flop down on the bed. Kelsey and I made our way to the one down the hall, and I peeked in. There was a bed in the middle, a closet on the right, and a window overlooking the lake on the left. Kelsey took our bags from me and set them on the floor, but I couldn't stop looking at the bed. Not only was there a large, gleaming pair of antlers right above where we'd be sleeping, but the bed wasn't made. The blanket and sheets were scattered, and one of the pillows was missing. "Oh, Mel, I bet one of your relatives forgot to make it before they left last time," Kelsey spoke up, noticing my hesitation. "Yeah, you're right," I admitted, coming out of the stupor I'd put myself in. Knowing my family, she was probably right. Also, knowing my family, I could understand why the front door had been mistakenly left unlocked. It still didn't explain where the flower pot was, but I put the thought out of my mind. We came here to relax for the weekend. No drama, no stress, no unnecessary thoughts. I smiled at her, and she took my hand to pull me back out into the hallway. Tara, hearing our footsteps, quickly poked her head out. "Are we eating soon?" she asked, looking at me waiting for an answer. Kelsey answered before I could. "I'm actually starving." Now they were both looking at me. I laughed and headed for the kitchen. Let's see if there's anything edible in here. If not, we still have some of the snacks in the car. I headed for the refrigerator, which turned out to be surprisingly full. There were lunch meats, cheeses, lettuce, everything you'd need for a quick sandwich. The weird thing was that it was all fresh as well. I turned to look at the girls, but they both shrugged. "Maybe Uncle Alan was here recently, since it's halfway through summer, sis," Tara commented. She was right. Uncle Alan usually spent a few weeks here, but it was odd that Mum hadn't told me that before she left. I was under the impression that no one had been here for a long time, given the state of the outside of the house. But that explained the situation with the bed and the front door even more. I nodded, and we set to work making dinner. The clock showed 10:30 as I lay in bed waiting for Kelsey to come in from her shower. Tara had already left about an hour ago, saying she was tired from the road and wanted to see what games she could play on her phone that didn't require an internet connection. Just as I was starting to fall asleep, the door swung open. Kelsey peeked inside with her cheerful grin and jumped into bed with me. "So, have you figured out what we should do tomorrow?" she asked, rolling over and leaning on her right arm to look at me. "Honestly, I haven't gotten that far, but I thought we could hang out on the dock since we brought our swimsuits and everything. Right now I'm just craving some peace and quiet," I replied, shifting my pillow to get comfortable. After that, we went back to our nightly routine from back in the dorm, making small talk and telling each other whatever was on our minds at the time. I woke up panting and feeling as if all the air had been knocked out of me. Was it the dream that had startled me? Or had I heard something? I grabbed my stomach and looked at the time. 4:45 in the morning. Kelsey and I fell asleep around midnight, so it had only been a few hours. I rolled over onto my back to take Kelsey's hand and pull her closer. But then my eyes widened when I realized she wasn't in bed anymore. Weird. Kelsey doesn't sleepwalk, I thought. A chilling feeling of dread crept into my chest again, and I slid off the bed, heading for our bedroom door. I stopped for a second, listening, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart and short breaths. I opened the door and sprinted out into the hallway, prepared for Kelsey to be coming back from the bathroom by now. To my despair, she wasn't. The hallway was empty, and I glanced at Tara's door. Tara snored, so I always knew what to listen for. But this time, there was no snoring. I grabbed the doorknob and turned it slowly, catching my breath. When I quickly poked my head inside, panic gripped me. Tara wasn't in her bed either. Could they really be playing a trick on me? It was too late, but if given the chance, these two would taunt me as usual. "Haha, guys, very funny. Why don't we go back to bed?" "I'm not in the mood." My voice echoed down the hallway, echoing in the living room. I crawled forward, listening to my soft footsteps on the wooden floor. I stopped again, straining my hearing. What was that noise? It sounded like something was dripping. Had we really left the faucet on? Walking into the living room, I froze for a second, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. I'd already chalked it up to how many hunting trophies my uncles had scattered around the house, but that didn't make it any less creepy at almost 5 in the morning. The dripping continued, but it was getting quite close. I turned to my right, looking at the small space before turning into the kitchen. I headed that way, and the dripping got louder and louder. I immediately screamed when I saw the source. It was Kelsey, her body hanging from antlers. Large deer antlers were stuck into her chest, and her head and arms were hanging down, lifeless and motionless. "Kelsey!" I screamed, running up to her. I squeezed under her body, trying to look into her face. Her eyes were wide open, but staring straight ahead. There was nothing in them. Where the hell was Tara? No sooner had I shouted her name than I heard screams coming from outside. I rushed to the front door, trying to ignore the fact that it opened right after being unlocked. I didn't want to think about how someone had managed to get in so easily, even though we'd locked it as soon as we'd entered the house today. The screaming continued, and I thought it echoed through the trees around us. "Tara, where are you?" I called out, not even sure if my little sister could answer me. How could I let this happen? I pulled out my phone and realized there was still no signal. I started to panic and ran to the car. The screaming suddenly stopped, and I forced myself to suppress my tears. If I could get far enough away to get help, I could get someone back here. I couldn't save Kelsey, but maybe I could save Tara. I threw myself into the driver's seat and shifted the transmission into reverse, barely looking back as I flew back the way we'd come. All I needed was a bar, and I could call the police. Just as I picked up speed, my phone rang. I slowed down and grabbed my phone, looking at the notifications. I had a voicemail from my mom, and my hands shook as I listened to it. "Hi, sweetie. I'm not sure if this will get to you. I think I gave you the wrong house number. It was 37, not 47. I'm sure you already guessed it when you saw the house and couldn't get in. I know your uncles haven't been there in a while. Love you girls. See you when you get home. My mom's voice echoed in the car as the phone slipped out of my hands and onto the floor. Tears streamed down my face as I looked out the window and saw a mailbox to my left. The numbers read 47. It was 5 years ago. My best friend and sister had been murdered by an unknown assailant who still hadn't been caught. When the police finally arrived, I was out of control. I was the one who didn't listen to my intuition and didn't take the time to realize we'd hit the wrong house. They found Kelsey hanging in the same place I left her, and Tara's body face down floating in the water. I don't think that's where he killed her though, because I never realized where her screams were coming from. To this day, I always wonder, why me? Why did he let me live? The only sign that explained it to me was a year ago. Walking out of class, I found a note on my car. It read, "I always like to leave my loved ones alive."